in the lives of ordinary people. And it is not acceptable to me that half of our people live in paycheck to paycheck and millions of people are trying to get by on 9, 10, 11 bucks an hour.
They shouldn't also have to struggle to keep a roof over their heads and food on their table.
Our paid wages so low, they cannot afford to pay for even their most basic needs.
To pay starvation wages.
Wage to $15 an hour. This is not a radical idea.
Is the minimum wage high enough? It's been asked for the last 9 years. Starting with the fight for 15, it was eventually championed by progressives and people like Bernie Sanders, eventually becoming a party plank in 2016. Continued to be championed by the Democrats, eventually failing all the while. Most recently in an attempt at a COVID-19 relief bill, but not without a partial victory from Joe Biden, issuing an executive order that required all federal contractors to pay at least $15 an hour. But there are some who would take contention with raising the minimum wage, the Carlsons and the Ingrams of the world. They would say that it would do more harm to the economy than good, leading to unemployment and strain our small businesses. I mean, they kind of have a point. Where does it all end? Are the Shapiros and the Kirks of the world, are they correct? Do we just keep raising the minimum wage higher and higher every so often? Let's take a look at the facts and think about the implications. In a study published in the Harvard Business Review, they found that for every $1 increase in the minimum wage, they found that the amount of workers scheduled increased by 27.7%, while the number of hours of each worker that each worker worked per week decreased by 20% or so. In a meta-analysis proffered up by the Center for Economic and Policy Research, they found that across all of the studies that there was no discernible effect whatsoever on employment. As a result of their research, they offer up 11 different possible channels, possibly contradicting that equalize everything out, and those include a reduction in hours worked, a reduction in non-wage benefits, a reduction in training of employees, changes in employment composition, higher prices, improvements in efficiency, that is, that the business owners will become more efficient, efficiency wage response from workers, that is, that they'll work harder if they're paid more, wage compression, that would be when the management take the brunt of it, so to speak, that their benefits and their wages are reduced or raises are not given. A reduction in profits, an increase in demand, that is, that the minimum wage would act as a stimulus for other businesses, and a reduced turnover rate. A mash and swirl of contradictory forces, hopefully giving pause to people like Dennis Prager, hopefully giving them something to think about. Others will point to the increased productivity that has happened over recent years and has been increasing since the 1950s. Information from the CBO also lines up with the study done by the CEPR, or at least lightly so, that the number of hours worked does reduce. However, the amount of people in poverty diminishes, and the amount of families entering and leaving poverty diminishes. But the overall change in real family income does decrease by about 10%, with the top earners taking and bearing most of the brunt of an increase in the minimum wage. Before we move on, we should probably talk about inflation. Inflation is when? Inflation is the reason why your dollar seems to be worth less than it used to be, and that's because it is. The rising cost of everything in relation to the value of the dollar makes it less valuable. And we should probably talk about real versus nominal. In real terms, at least as far as economics is concerned, that means that it has been adjusted for inflation, while nominal means that it has not. Inflation is the reason why A house in 1980 only cost $47,000. But today, the average house costs $285,000. It's also the reason why a car in 1980 cost only $7,000, while today it costs $40,000. It is also the reason why tuition in 1980, at least for the U of M, cost $1,500 a year, and today costs $15,000. Now, what does this mean for workers? What it ultimately means is more debt and less buying power. While raising the minimum wage and adjusting it for inflation is a path forward, is it the only way? I wish to, in future videos, or perhaps a series, posit a different path forward. The fight for 15 is not really an economic one, though, is it? Especially when we look at income inequality, at the inflation itself, that this isn't exactly an economic one. If it were, we would have kept up with inflation. That this is a more political one, a more political fight. So might I put forward that rather than pinning a minimum wage to inflation, what if we demanded 50% of the profits? Or some percent of the profits. The math, as I will show in future videos, different videos, better videos, the possibilities. Now, before you say that it will just as equally, if not worse, harm small businesses, I want you to think for a moment. I want you to look down your main street or out your window or what have you and ask and wonder, how many corporations are there? And how much profit do they make by comparison to a small business? If we look back at the CEPR study, we could see that it could very well and very possibly and does in fact stimulate smaller businesses and the economy at large, that out of the hands of a few shareholders and into the common working man's hands, it should spur Main Street versus Wall Street and should offer at least a reprieve, a chance for the working man, no matter how small, a chance to breathe. Please be gentle. This was my first YouTube video and my first video in quite a long time. I know the quality isn't quite there, but give it time. This was an attempt to acquaint myself with things and reacquaint myself with a certain craft. Just dipping my toe in the water, so to speak. Thank you all. Like, subscribe. I wouldn't share, but you know, you do you. Thanks for watching.